As Carmel would say, like an ice cream.
I like an ice cream.
Good morning, is it still morning? Morning everybody. This is the YA panel in which we talk about not just getting readers when they're young, but hopefully encouraging the readers of YA fiction to take up crime writing as soon as they can put a few words together. We even have a young adult section of the Scarlet Stiletto Awards, which we encourage as anyone under 18 to enter. And we've had some 12-year-olds win, and we've had some 8-year-olds win. Yes, was that the axe relief teacher? The axe murder relief teacher. My name is Lindy Cameron. I am a founding member of Sisters in Crime. I've been a national co-convener for a long time, about 20 years at least. I'm also a published crime writer. I write crime fiction and I write action thrillers with helicopters blowing up and spies and shit. I also write true crime. And at the moment I'm also writing a young adult time-travelling adventure with archaeologists and possibly vampires, so hence me being on the panel. I'm also a great fan of YA fiction. I love it. Some of the best stuff I've read in the last probably 2 years has been YA fiction, including the books by my 3 colleagues to the right. I'm going to get them to tell you about their books, however, but I will introduce Nancy Kunz to my right, Simone Howell in the middle, and Ellie Marnie, who you've all just seen at the far end. We're going to talk about how to grab the attention of young adults and get them reading crime, but we're also going to talk about what brought them to writing crime in the first place, and why young adult, why not adult? So we'll start with Nancy. Will everyone, each of you, sort of describe your books?
Sure.
Nancy thinks she doesn't really qualify to be with us, but she does.
I think I'm right on the edge of crime writing in that I don't think I ever set out to be a crime writer. In fact, I didn't know I was a crime writer until Lindy told me. She invited me to, she killed the crime writing convention back in, 2011? And I had never really thought about myself as being a crime writer. I just thought I write young adult adventure stories. But yeah, then it was pointed out to me that my latest story was in fact a murder mystery, so I really should have known. Yeah, I think that I just write things that hang on mysteries, because that's, I think that's the quintessential story in the end, something with a mystery in it. And so that can be so many different things. Crime writing can be technological things like I've written some of. It can be, glamorous contemporary with rock stars, which was my latest book, which I don't have a copy of, but Ellie's got one. Oh, okay. Don't worry. Yeah, I've written 3 books. The first one's Mishaps, the second Dangerously Placed, and the third Kill the Music. The first one was about a girl who had basically genetic bad luck, and how she solves the mystery of how this came to be, and manages to get her own luck back. The second one was the aforementioned murder mystery, in which a girl goes on work experience, but in a virtual environment, and her boss is murdered in that virtual world while she's there, so she becomes involved in that. And my latest book, Kill the Music, is about a very high-level rock band who are under threat of murder, and how that is hopefully, stopped from happening. So, yeah.
Okay. My most recent book is Girl Defective, which a friend just said today, oh, I just worked it out. This is true. I sort of wanted to write kind of a Raymond Chandler for teenagers, just from reading a lot of this sort of stuff. And also I thought it would, again, like it would be fun to do something with structure, not realising that I'm quite bad at structure. And also, yeah, wanting to kind of write like an outsider sort of character. And for me, whenever I'm writing teenage characters, they are always the outsider character anyway. So I kind of felt like there were a lot of sort of things about contemporary young adult fiction which kind of lent themselves to a crime-y environment. Girl Defective is more of a mystery. So dark stuff happens and there is kind of a solution at the end of it, but it's not kind of what I started out writing, which is sort of interesting in itself. But I won't talk about that too much because it's only really interesting to me. But yeah, it's funny. Like I think that I could in one way sort of say yes, it's kind of dark, it's mysterious, it's about crime, it's about kind of contemporary society and all this sort of stuff. And on the other hand, I could say, well, it's kind of like a coming of age. It's a girl kind of coming to accept certain things about her life. So yeah, it fits somewhere.
That's a good description. That's a good description.
Well, you've all just kind of heard about the stuff that I write, and I'm actually a lot more boring than you guys, because I tend to just write straight crime murders with teenage protagonists, and I haven't diversified really that much from that premise. Like I said, I got my start with Scarlet Stiletto Awards, figured out I could write crime enough that people would want to read it, and then decided I was going to apply it to my original passion, which has always been young adult writing. So, yeah.
Can I ask why? Why is your passion young adult?
It's just more interesting. I find books with grown-ups in them really start to get kind of boring. Also, you know, I had some aspirations to literary greatness at some stage, but then I realised that I actually work better with quite a structured plot, and
With a plot.
yeah, with a plot that always spurs me on generally. So I actually have a lot of trouble now reading books that don't have teenagers in them. People keep giving me books with, you know, with grown-ups in them, and I keep putting them on a back shelf, putting them on a to-be-read pile that just never gets any smaller.
I'm glad that's not just me.
Yes, I have a theme about the capital L literature, mostly because it doesn't have a plot, and mostly because the writers and readers of it seem to think that it is superior to genre fiction in general, but crime. And I, as Sisters in Crime well knows from all the panels that we've done, had over the years, that you can say more about the human condition in its various phases and through crime fiction than you can with just about any, certainly with any literature. Because there's a plot, because there's a reason to hang things on.
I don't know if I'm you know, particularly prejudiced against big L literature as such, but it's sort of it's always at the top. There's been this long-term construction of big L literature kind of at the top of this ladder, which is tiered down towards. And I think if you're a young adult writer and a genre writer, and you write, and you're a woman, you end up somewhere down like here. And then another writer of spec fic, China Miable, I saw him at the Melbourne Writers Festival a number of years ago, and he suggested that if actually you took that ladder where people tend to put their big L literature at the top and the genre down the bottom, and if you just flipped it on its side and made it into a spectrum of literature, that it would actually be a lot more reflective of what most people actually read. So yeah, and also providing a certain amount of equality for each level. I think there's a lot to be said in literature and big L literature, and there's a lot to be said in young adult fiction and in genre fiction.
I think that putting it on the side is an excellent idea, because effectively it's just another genre. But they have tickets on themselves, we don't. don't need tickets because we know.
They don't make as much
Yes,
money.
they don't make as much money, so and they have to get the awards. Yeah. So back to YA. Why do you?
Right way. Well, I don't know that I guess this is my third book, and they have all been sort of young adult books, but it's really just because they are featuring young adult protagonists. I'm a bit like Ellie in that I prefer to read books with young people in them. I don't mind if they're written, I don't mind if they're books that are about old people who then go into their past and history, but I just think I'm really interested in these sort of formative years. I'm interested in this time of kind of firsts and when you are kind of like making yourself up. And for me, young adult fiction, always sort of having these characters at this time in their life, to me, it's kind of much more interesting than, say, the person who's, I don't know, 45 and broken down. You know, I want to go back and say, okay, what got you there? Sort of thing. I don't know. I think I was sad. I tried to write adult fiction, maybe. But it's an interesting kind of thing, because I think that a lot of people see the young adult tag and go, oh, it's not for me kind of thing. And I think that a lot of adults forget that they were at one point a young adult, and that really teenagers are just kind of like about to be adults anyway, and people don't change that much. I don't really feel like I've changed a huge amount, since I was 15. All the sort of things that concerned me then are there. I mean, there's more knowledge, there's more of like the world opening up, that kind of thing. But yeah, so I guess I kind of like to put these characters who are on a point where the world is opening like that, and they are kind of starting to see, oh, okay, there's dark stuff here, or there's this here, or there's that here. So that's why I'm attracted to it.
So like first murder as well as first love.
Recognition of the darker stuff, I think. Yeah.
Nathan?
Look, I think that's very similar to what I think, which is that it actually makes me think about some things that editors I know from major publishing houses have said, which is that there's a large amount of the young adult market which is actually, people our age, women in their 30s, 40s, 50s particularly, but also men to some extent, read young adult for preference, a large amount of that readership. And I think it's for those reasons, because you're looking at the difference between, you've got two kinds of fiction that are both linguistically complex, they have gripping plots, they have a length of book that's interesting to people that keeps you engaged. But one of the major differences would be that a lot of adult fiction might have a protagonist, like you say, who's jaded, who might be talking about someone who's going through, divorce or rehab, or lots of
heroin addiction,
something like this. Which is not to say that doesn't happen in young adult. Of course, there are lots of dark things, not in what I write, but what a lot of people write. If you want to read about people's experiences with sex and drugs and family breakups and these things, those can be found in young adult. But I think the difference is that there's an optimism in being at the start of your life that may not be present in a lot of particularly contemporary adult fiction, that sense that there's somewhere else to go with your life, that you still have the chance to change, which maybe we forget as we grow older, and a paciness, a sense that the story is going to keep going, because we want to find out what happens, not just sit there dwelling on it, which is probably the reason that I only read young adult. I just don't have the patience.
It's amazing the attention span of teenagers. They have the angsty thought and then they're on to something else, whereas a jaded alcoholic divorcee is just going to wallow in it for a while, for several pages, while they get drunk again.
Yes, so there's a sense of hopefulness.
Yeah. But I think there's also like that interesting thing about when you are young, you have that ability to block out everything else and be obsessed with the minutiae, like in a way that you can't be when you're 30 or 40, because you've got too many other
intensity
irritating pressures.
Yeah.
So to be able to write a character who, this is the thing that they're driven by, this is the thing that they're interested in, it's a really great feeling to be able to kind of have an obsessive character like that, and I think you can kind of do that with teenage fiction
And with
Says it well.
it does. And with YA crime, you know, like I think really too a lot of teenage life is about working out the mystery of who they are as people. And so that lends itself really well to an investigative approach when you put them in a situation where they have to start, you know, following clues. They are their own mystery, you know, in lots of ways. And so the mystery of who they are as people, as characters, kind of unfolds as they discover. It creates a nice parallel with the mystery that they're uncovering in the story.
Yeah, instead of just having, I mean, there was I'm sure it's still happening at the moment in the world of non-crime young adult fiction or non-fantasy, the sort of ultra-realistic, you know, family dramas that had no hook, that must have been dire, I think, for teenagers to have to read at school, because they were about coming of age without any other influence, any other interest in it, and no reference to the rest of the world. Like the simple fact, for instance, that Ellie's characters are loosely based on a concept of Holmes and Watson. They're not based on that, but in the context of your books, Ellie actually acknowledges the fact that, you know, they keep joking that Mycroft is Sherlock's smarter older brother, and that he calls her Watts. He won't call her Rachel because he wants that connection. So Ellie acknowledges that pop culture, in a sense, reference to the rest of the world, whereas a lot of ordinary, I'll just call it ordinary for want of a better word, young adult fiction was just, there was no pop culture references in it. It's all angst, and it's like it's separate, and it's all angst-filled and traumatic, and will he get on the football team, or will she get on the cheerleading squad, and there's nothing else hanging on it. When you've got a mystery, or it's a fantasy novel, it just lends itself better.
I just recently read a book by Megan Abbott called The Fever, which is, and she's an American writer. She wrote a lot of noir things set in the 50s, even though she was writing them in, you know, recently. But it's interesting because it's three teenage girls. They're the protagonists. The story is sort of about them. It's about a contagion that sets through a small town where girls start fitting in the classroom, and then they all start doing it. And the mystery is really trying to work out where it's all kind of come from. But on another level, it's sort of also about the drama of being a teenager and you know, maybe that also adult tendency to kind of look at teenage life and go, oh, you know, you're just being a drama queen, or you're just, you know, you're not kind of, your emotions aren't valid because you're not a real grown-up person yet, that sort of thing. And that's funny because that's being put out. That's an adult novel, and lots of adults are reading it. And I wonder what it would be like to be a teenager to read it. Sometimes I wish I could just, you know, shave off those years, slough off those years, and actually kind of be back in that headspace. So, I mean, you were asking before about that sort of the YA kind of versus adult, where, you know, how does it? We're also murky on the definition. It's really hard.
Speaking of sending back to when you were a teenager, what did you read as a teenager? I mean, I'm a little bit older than most of you, and I know what most of the conveners of Sisters in Crime and the long-term membership of Sisters in Crime were raised on Famous Five. Or what's the other one, Trixie Dalton or Nancy Drew. But most of us, it seems to have been Famous Five. And I discovered over coffee, I think, that it's still Famous Five. Thank goodness for Famous Five. But my great joy with you guys writing young adult fiction and young adult crime is that teenagers will now have both. They will have still have what we had if they're still reading Famous Five, but they will have you read as well. And Australian stories. So was it Famous Five or was it... Yeah.
Pretty much. Famous Five. Nancy Drew, although she always used to shit me to tears, she always had that, you know, that fallback. She always had that fallback of, you know, having wealth around her, which made it very easy. Oh, you know, I'll just fly over there on my jet, or, you know, I can do, and being able to do just about anything. You know, she could pick locks, she could shoot guns, she could drive a plane, she could, you know, I mean, that always used to bother me for reasons that I didn't understand when I was a teenager, but understand better now that I'm writing the things that teenagers can realistically do.
That's why you had get on a plane, not fly it to London.
Not fly it to London herself,
yeah.
no.
But love those Sweet Dreams books, those Sweet Valley High books, those ones, you know, when I was probably 12, 13, that were all about America and all about kind of boys and how you kind of get a boy to like you and how you drop your pencil and he'll pick it up, you know. I just think, like, as a teenager, I was constantly, like, reading these books, trying to find clues about how I was supposed to act, like, how are you a girl, like, what are you supposed to do?
Did it work? Did you try it? Dropping the pencil?
Dropping the pencil and say, I was going to say, that's it, that's right.
So then
was that I didn't read Sweet Valley High or anything like that. But yeah, maybe I thought that was why I was so socially inept, was that I didn't read anything. I think one of the reasons that I feel like I'm not as much of a crime writer as a lot of people in this room is because I didn't come from that reading crime background much at all. Well, I did read Famous Five amongst millions of other things. But
so you just got lost between Famous Five and
yeah, no, I think the main crime that I would have read as a teenager actually was Alice Peters' Cadfael books. Because I am really coming back much more from a history and to some extent fantasy and sci-fi background, and so that sort of influences what I do, which sounds really weird when you write technologically oriented contemporary YA, but it's yeah, I didn't read those sorts of things. I don't think I've ever read a Nancy Drew, and I think maybe that's because people used to tease me about my name being Nancy. No, you know, if you get called Nancy Reagan and Nancy Drew often enough, you don't really like either of those things. So,
I mean, the other thing is, of course, I mean, when I was growing up and sort of coming into reading, it was as a teenager anyway, YA was only just in its infancy as a category. So actually, I probably read more adult books than officially classified YA. I mean, YA to some extent has grown as the market has and as publishers have dictated that this has become quite a profitable category. So yeah, I was reading, you know, Christie and Conan Doyle and Asimov and
There were always Agatha Christie's at Beach
always
House.
Agatha
It's always
Christie.
like
It's always
standing.
Yeah,
it was like having a Beatles Bible in a hotel. Yeah.
I can remember actually the first Agatha Christie that really struck me, and it was the one called Endless Sleep, and close your ears if you don't want a spoiler, because the character, the narrator is the person who did it, and you kind of find out 3/4 of the way through. And I remember just reading that and going, wow, you can do that as a writer?
Yeah.
And just being really fascinated by it. Yeah.
Well, I'm wondering, Simone, if perhaps having eventually worked out that dropping the pencils didn't work, at what age did you finally work out that sharpening them and using them as a weapon clicked in?
I don't know, I'm still really clueless. Many levels, all levels of life, really. I think that's another reason why I like writing, because I can, you know, have characters who are vaguely empowered in ways that I will never be.
What about there's a new category called New Adult, which I don't think is the publishers are actually managing to work properly. It's like it's between young adult, which kind of goes, I mean, you know, young adult, as we know, the reading age goes from young adults to like 13 or whatever up to 70 or 80.
19.
Yeah, but the age group of the characters are 13 to 19, but the readership is 13 to 90.
Yeah.
And then they've got this new adult category so that they can have older teenagers having sex. That's basically why they've done it. Because, as we know, they're already having dead bodies and, you know, viewing autopsies. Beautiful autopsy, by the way. Sorry. So there's another aspect, the fact that Nancy was telling me earlier on that her publisher doesn't want her next novel because it's fantasy. And this is the thing that you were asking about before. Were you talking about writing literature before or writing just a standalone?
Just writing whatever you want to do.
Whatever you want to write, yeah.
And then just there being a beautiful market out there waiting for it.
Yeah. Well, because what normally happens is what has happened to Nancy, and that she's written a fantasy novel. She's known for sort of YA, crimey, mystery type things, and she goes and has the audacity to write a high fantasy novel, and a publisher goes,
you don't know the half of it. It was middle grade.
oh, okay. Right.
But for those of you who aren't in the know, middle grade is the readership directly below young adults, so kind of 9 to 12-year-old readership. And I knew that was a risk that I took in doing that one, and I'm actually writing another contemporary YA crime at the moment for my usual publishers. But yeah, to change like that, can be, yeah. I did think about trying some other things after my first book. My first one, Mishaps, actually sold the better. It still sells better than my other books. But they told me immediately after that started to sell well and went into its second print run and things that it would probably be a good idea not to drastically change what my next thing was going to be. So not to suddenly think, oh, I've had a published young adult book now, I can write adult or real literature, as some people call it. Because once you start to get a readership, publishers, at least traditional publishers, don't really like you to start wandering off too much because they feel that you've only just made inroads into any kind of recognition. So it would be better to continue on, and you can't really blame them for that because sales are pretty awful.
What about your young adult readers who then grow up?
Yeah.
And might want, this
Well,
is
see, this is what I've done wrong. I've gone backwards. What was I thinking, really?
This happens to everyone. I mean, Morelia in the earlier panel was talking about how many. Are you still in here, Morelia? Yeah. How many books? How many different publishers?
Only 3, but soon to be 4.
So 4 different publishers because she keeps changing genre. And I mean, even Kerry Greenwood, for instance. Now, everyone knows Kerry Greenwood. 20, 21, whatever which she's up to now with the Friday books. 6 or so with the Corinna Chapmans, and Allen and Unwin are more than happy to publish her. They went off her at one while, around about the time of the first She Killed It convention. And they just thought, oh, no one's buying crime, no one's reading crime. Publishers say that about every 2 years, they're mental. Which just proves they don't know what they're talking about, most of them. And so Kerry was even joking at the first She Killed It convention that we should have a cupboard, a closet for the publishers to speak out of because no one would want to listen to them. And also because she maintained that at that time that Allen and Unwin only published her to keep her a secret.
I think part of
it was whoever it was, yeah. Her publisher, Australian publishers only published women crime fiction to keep us a secret. And so here's Kerry all these years later with Allen and Unwin loving her to death with the 2 different series, but they did not want her ancient historical novels. As big and as well known as she was, so lucky me, Clandestine Press, I got to do those books. So it's not just, authors and in the young adult genre who go, you can't write this, we don't want you to write this. Tara Moss had to do the same thing. She wanted to switch genres and write the spider goddessy paranormal thing. She had to get a different publisher.
Yeah. But you think about the pressures too that are on the market at the moment, and the way digital publishing is changing the face of the market in the way that it's changed the face of the music industry. However many years ago. And publishers are under a lot of pressure to kind of be predictors of what the next new trends will be. And the fact is that no one can know what the new trends will be. No one's that psychic. And so they take a stab in the dark, and then if they're successful with the book that you've given them, then they suggest that, they start talking about author branding and about how, they want to continue along that line, which is probably fair enough, because faced with an inability to predict exactly what will be the hot new thing, I think you do tend to rely on either throwing a whole lot of darts at the wall and hoping one of them will stick, or actually making something work. Okay, we've got something, it's a little bit successful, let's push it hard, let's write. This was the first book that I wrote was written as a standalone and pitched as a standalone, and then when there was a suggestion that it could take off, then I was given the green light to do another one, and then a third, and now I had a pitch for the book that was to follow the trilogy, and they said, oh, we'd really like you to write a spin-off with a character from the series. And I was like, okay. I agree with Annie Boswell, who sort of said, you just feel so lucky that you've published it all. It's just like a shot in a million that you're even given the opportunity to publish. You kind of do feel so grateful. It's like, yeah, okay. jump, how high.
It's intriguing that you talk about them taking it from standalone to a series because in my experience, because I have just written standalones, a lot of people were saying early on, you should be writing a series because that's what everyone wants. But in fact, my publishers at Random House were saying at the time that series was becoming really difficult to sell. And I know of at least 3 really good young adult authors who've worked with the same publishers who haven't managed to get the 3rd in their trilogy published because you get a series going out there, and if the second one doesn't do well enough, then no way is the marketing or sales team going to let you continue on. But the same sort of thing, the same problem can happen, I suppose, from standalone, is that if it doesn't, you haven't got anything then to launch people into getting the next book. And I think one of the things that's happening a lot, not so much with digital in terms of e-books, but in terms of the way that we shop, is probably that people, when you go into a bookshop, you can have a flip through and you might see a cover that you like, or you might see, something that sparks off an interest in something you don't know. When you go to a digital bookshop on the web, you're surfing the internet, looking at different things. You don't actually just get that chance to flick. You sort of have to know, if you went to the book depository or Amazon or something and you didn't know what you wanted, the amount of stuff that's on there, you can't just flick through and look. There's millions of options, so you sort of have to know. So I think maybe that's one of the reasons that people are now starting to say a series might be better than it was, 6 or 7 years ago when I was first published, because there's something there then to say to people, oh, that's that author I like, I'll look her up on this book website and I'll find more of her books or more of her series, where a standalone doesn't stand out.
You are the first genre author I've ever heard say got told by their publisher not for a series. The only one I've ever heard.
Well, I think it's like we get told not, but
got told me, so don't do it. It's usually what the publishers want from genre writers is a series, as you know, fantasy blockbusters.
Then there was in YA, in the last 18 months, there was a little bit of talk around the idea of series fatigue. That teenagers want to read successive books by one author, but they don't particularly. Everyone's like, oh my God, we've had so many series on the market, and it's like the teenage readers themselves are aware that this is a marketing ploy, so they're kind of gotten wise to the idea.
But on the other hand, Isabel Carmody, I don't know how many people here, because she doesn't write crime, she writes fantasy, and Isabel Carmody had her first novel published when she was like 15 or something, precocious, and she's now in her 40s, 50s, something like that. And she has readers that grew up with her. They were teenagers when the first one came out, and they're waiting. They are still waiting for the last one in the series that has taken something like 20 years. So they're now grown-ups hanging out for the book, and then there's a whole new, generation of kids starting again. So I have a feeling that when the publishers are saying series aren't selling or there's teenage fatigue, I think it's a marketing department thing. I don't actually think that it's editors, I don't think it's writers, and I don't think it's teenagers. I think it's the marketing department that's saying, oh no, that crime fiction doesn't sell. Well, let's call them thrillers. If we call them thrillers, they'll sell.
I don't know if actually I agree with that, because I've been in touch with a lot of book bloggers who do talk about, they're teenagers themselves, that's the thing about YA, is a lot of the marketing push has been, for these books, has been online, and it's about blog tours, and it's about connecting with booktubers, book bloggers, and because that's how teenagers that's how the word of mouth is spreading on social media and online.
And it's quite amazing to think that, like when I was 17, word of mouth would happen with books, but not like this.
It's not like that.
And it is a bit like what Annie was talking about competing with, and it is an entertainment now. It is what it is. And
you're getting a lot of their opinions directly
on
the net. They'll comment on your Facebook page, and they'll tweet you and say, are you writing another series? Or a lot of what I've been getting lately is, please say you're not going to write a love triangle. The next book We're so sick of love triangles.
One other thing I was just thinking earlier, that the difference between sort of, I guess, the YA and the literature and genre generally is that you could go into a bookshop and there will be a teenage section, and within that YA section there will be crime, there will be fantasy, everything is chucked in together. So it's kind of great.
Yeah.
That's probably going to start changing now. The more and more kind of, you know, the more distinct categories that people can find, the happier booksellers are, because they feel, oh, exactly, we'll put that there. I remember talking to Melina Marquetta, who has done a lot of realistic contemporary young adult fiction and has also done a fantasy series, and she was saying that books, I don't know whether it was her publisher or a bookseller, but she couldn't get her books to go in the fantasy section as well as in the genre sections. So, because it'd be like double dipping.
Well, that's probably another reason that you were saying that I'm the only genre person you've heard say about the series, is they don't market mine as genre, they're marketed as YA contemporary.
Really?
Yeah.
That would make more sense.
Even the middle one, which was really technological.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and I think that people do then break those up. They're starting to do that more and more. You've got to hope that they do it accurately as well, because the other day I saw that Kill the Music, my latest one, was put in a bookshop section online, and a very big bookshop online, as 5 to 9 year olds.
Did you write them a little letter?
I did tweet about it, but I don't know if they noticed. But yeah, it's a bit worrying.
One thing that you can do, and I do it whenever I go into a bookshop, as I'm sure all the authors in the room do, turn your own book face out.
Face out.
No, don't do it.
And our friends. We do it for our friends.
And we do it to all our friends too. Every bookshop you go into, you know, if it's in the YA section under this, you just take one copy, go and stick it in the fantasy section. Even if it's only there for a day, someone might buy it from there.
So I like the idea of YA being moved up as well, like when you walk into a bookshop and it's not just in the back shameful section,
Yes.
where the teenagers lurk with
The other thing I'd really like to see would be some variation in what's considered YA, because my books are probably aimed, well, they're certainly read by younger people than your two books, I think. Mine's what we call teen. Just if it's not bad enough to, you know, be young adult, teen is seen as worse, because that's your sort of 11 to 14-year-olds. Which was not what I intended. I write protagonists who are generally 16, but that's what's read. But if you get put into young adult, there's an expectation that those books will look dark, like literally dark covers. They will probably have some kind of, you know, sultry-looking individual on them, and that preferably. So this is good marketing here. And preferably there'll be some kind of, you know, supernatural theme or something. So essentially, if you don't have anything like you know, undead people trying to get it on with each other, then it's not young adult. And so, you know, a book that looks like it might be a fun adventure and have glamour in it and stuff should belong in there. Which is I'm sure that's the only reason that bookshops are sending back my books. But I do think that there's a perception about young adult that's what it is, that it's gritty, and that the only worth it has, in that it has a lesser worth than literature, the worth that it does have is in being gritty and being deep, in looking at dark things. I am apparently the only person who, as a teenager and still as an adult, wanted to read something for fun. You know, with like fun stuff and jokes and this sort of stuff. That doesn't come out a lot. And I don't know whether that's a thing in crime as well as in just general young adult. But I do think that that's maybe also keeping other genre pieces down, whether that be crime or fantasy or sci-fi or things like that, is that people are not seeing that as worthy even within the young adult category.
Well, I published Kerry Greenwood's Out of the Blackland, which is for adults. But on the back cover, it describes one of the characters as a teenage general. And so, which he was, because it's ancient Egypt and people only lived till they were 30 or 40. So, you know, if you were a general in the army, you probably were, invariably were a teenager. Most of the soldiers were probably 12 to 18 and then useless or legless or something after that. But one of the college bookshop sellers, because it had teenage general on the back, put it in young adult. Oh my God! Karen Chisholm can vouch for how many times the word phallus comes up in that book. She can do the e-book for And there's homosexual sex, there's heterosexual sex,
That would have been delighted.
sex, and there are lots and lots of phalluses, and it was, inappropriate. But
Well, speaking of inappropriate, I wanted to ask the rest of you guys, how much do you get away with gore? Because I basically write, because I'm one of these people who writes teen and writes things for fun, I write non-gore crime. There's no gore in my books. Where, when I was reading Every Breath, I was thinking, wow, this is real crime. Like there's like dead people and blood and stuff like this. And do publishers actually encourage that because they know that you're writing crime, or is it a bit like sex where they go, oh, this is young adult, you can't go that far?
That's an interesting question. I remember when I first met you, Nancy, at Sheffield, and there was a panel on how crossing the line in YA.
Oh yeah, I remember that one.
How far is too far for young adult? And I just read your big autopsy scene, so you kind of get a bit of an idea of how far I can go. And there's quite a number of scenes of violence in both the books, and there's blood and gore and stuff like that. But one of the things that, who was it? It might have been Marion DiPiers or Karen Healy pointed out, is that the line for violence is a fair bit, the bar is set a fair bit higher.
It was Marianne, because she had, in her Burn Bright book, which is really brilliant, she had originally had something that was construed as being a very sexual sort of thing, that wasn't considered appropriate, and she had to change it.
So the line for violence is set up a bit higher than it is for sex, for sexual content. So I have to be a bit aware of language choice for descriptions of things like the autopsy. I was very selective about how much medical detail I put in, and I didn't need to describe all of the organs and all of the processes specifically. I wanted to kind of give it a bit of a more lyrical, I guess, impression to the reader, and also because it's being viewed through Rachel's eyes, so she's not medically trained, even though she has an interest in that. She's just an observer, so she has no frame of reference for what's happening. So she sort of is just taking it in a big block. But I did have to negotiate some of the violent scenes. There were a few really full-on scenes where they're placed in danger and the baddies, like Meg was saying, there's a few scenes where you wonder whether or not they're going to get out intact. And I did have to negotiate a little bit about that. Like apparently, it's okay for the teenage protagonist to view the body after it's dead, but to see actually someone die is a bit too hardcore. But I'm finding that the negotiations over the romance scenes to be much more complicated. Like my editor came back and said, okay, I'm going on leave, I'm going to take your book with me, thanks for the rewrites. We'll talk about the sex when I come back. I was like, oh, okay. So I'm bracing myself now, but how much am I allowed to actually say?
I had to negotiate some violence in my last one, and I wouldn't have called it a violent book at all. I actually had the protagonist in Kill the Music has some martial arts training, and in the scheme of things, that comes in helpful, but it's not a major part of it. But I was interested to note that when my edits came back after my book was accepted, one of the things that was in there's a cover letter usually, at least from Random House, where they talk about what they like about the book and things, and then you get the actual edits. And the cover letter said, we really love that you've written this really kick-ass heroine, which I thought was great. She's very independent, she's capable of defending herself, and she does so. But then there's a scene later on where she in fact kicked ass. She kicked, there's a boy who comes up and, in a ridiculous joking sort of way, but tries to grope her bum. And she comes back with a roundhouse kick. And they said, you know, we didn't think this is appropriate. So I was like, so you can have a kick-ass heroine as long as she doesn't kick anyone's ass. That seemed a bit weird.
And he could grope her, but she should.
Yeah, no, he got in trouble for that, and I changed it to she pushed him against the lockers, but he wasn't allowed to actually be like really. Similarly, we had I don't want to spoiler it too much in case anyone actually reads it, but towards the end there's a bit where the person who is behind the threats of death to the band and so on reveals that in my original one that his or her intent, that was a bit of a giveaway, was in fact to die along with them, because this is a person who's become very, very jaded and you know, is really over everything. And my editors said that because I write teen rather than young adult, that it wouldn't be appropriate to suddenly talk about, even though this doesn't happen, no one actually is killed, it wouldn't be appropriate to talk about someone contemplating suicide. So we actually had to change that he was prepared to die if the worst came to it, not that was an intent. So yeah, I haven't had any trouble with sex scenes because I don't really write more than a bit of snogging, but yeah, violence is something they do. Yeah, I guess that's why it made me wonder whether when you're doing slightly older stuff and real crime, whether that's a problem.
Look, I wanted to ask you about that too, but I was really surprised when you said that teens read up. You know, that was the thing that shocked me, was because my protagonists are like 17, 18 years old, and so I imagined that the pitch would be about 15. You know, I sort of thought, oh yeah, 15, 14, 15. But, you know, I've been really surprised by the number of responses I've had from readers who are between 12 and 14. And so I'm kind of really mindful of that now. You know, I wouldn't call it self-editing, but I'm aware that actually, you know, the kids that are reading these books are primarily in like class 7 and 8. And, you know,
are they enjoying it though?
They're loving it, so, which is great. But you know, when I start to think about
who tries not to self-edit, or the parents who buy the books in the first
place. I have a bugbear about how parents really don't read what their kids are reading, you know, and really aren't aware. Because of course, you know, around the time that we all went to high school, young adult didn't exist, so you just kind of read what was on offer. And then when you left high school, and then you know, I got older and had kids, and you don't realise how much the literature scene has changed. When you walk into a high school library and you would see a whole lot of stuff that you never even heard of, and that landscape has changed, and parents don't really get that.
But, you know, I just think about what's in the newspaper every day, and what's on television, and what nobody
talks about that.
I'm trying really hard when I write now to not think about the age, because I've had a similar thing, like, you know, I write a lot of, not a lot, but my books, there's always sex and there's always drugs, because those were my concerns when I was a teenager, and that's what I kind of feel like most teenagers are going to have to make a choice about that at some point, or going to come up against it at some point. You know,
life.
Yeah, mostly. You know, whether they're into it or they're not into it, that doesn't sort of bother me, but I just think they exist, and to write as if that they don't, if I'm writing about kind of 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, is to kind of just, you know, elephant in the room.
Whitewash.
And then it becomes fiction.
Well, yeah.
Like that kind of fiction. You know, exactly. There's no basis in reality if there's...
Yeah, and I'm trying to write realistic fiction, like I am, but it is interesting that how much now I do think, oh, you know, would I be happy with 12-year-old? And then I look at the television and I think, well, you know what, it's not CSI, it's not, there's just brutes.
And they're watching this stuff, you know, and they're reading, you know, like that was the other reason why I got into young adult crime, was because, well, I knew I could write crime, and then I sort of thought, oh, I'll investigate this a bit. And you go into high school libraries, they've got a lot of adult crime on the shelves, you know. When I was researching this in 2010, they had, you know, Patricia Cornwell, they had Susan Hill, they had all, you know, they had Conan Doyle and Christie, but they also had Steve Larson. I mean, you know, if you're reading really graphic descriptions of rape and murder in the Steve Larson book, then and that's acceptable on high school library shelves, then, and this, yeah, that was what shocked me, was that these books are completely readily available to teenagers, which is fair enough. I mean, by the time they get to year 12, they're 18 and you know, they can make those decisions themselves. But there wasn't really a niche of people writing crime with teenage protagonists so that everything's seen through teenage eyes, and I think there's a lot to be said for a literature that allows teenagers to sort of have a voice and see themselves represented in the literature that they read.
So do you think that, in fact, that makes it sound almost as if publishers are the ones doing censorship? If parents aren't reading things and high schools are putting
They might be setting the bar.
things, then it's really up to the publishers. And if anything, they seem, I don't know, perhaps it's just me, but to be giving more censorship than
Maybe we should say it's not up to the publishers, it's up to the marketing people.
yeah, that's probably true.
The market,
Sales and marketing
here
people are the ones who are pitching it.
The problem is in the big five publishing companies, the marketing people are that they're making decisions on what they think will sell, what will look good in a bookshop.
Yeah.
It's they're not making any decisions on content whatsoever.
But then, you know, if I'm just pitching, if my agent was pitching something to the US and pitching it to editors, and they would be very aware of the amount of cursing, J and C's, and drinking and drugs and all of those content issues would come up in like foreign rights discussions.
Well, one good thing about the Australian publishing world is that there's a lot more allowances made for things like language. I mean, you know, what kid do you know who doesn't swear? And if you're not using the F word in, you know,
That's completely
that's not realistic. Well, it's unrealistic that we don't use it, but it's good that we don't, because let them, you know, find out by themselves. But the fact that most Australian publishers will let kids say, you know, shit and bum and bugger. I mean, you know, Harry Potter, what's his name, the boy, the red-haired one, Ron, the whole way through. That was always saying bugger and bloody hell.
The guidelines I got when I started out were that if it's okay in the national ad campaign, like that bugger ad that they speak for the youth, then you can say it, and anything stronger than that has to be used rarely and at times of emotional imperative.
And yet Ron was saying bloody hell all the time.
There's this big jump from that. I remember Karen Neely saying at She Killed Her that in her books, her young adult mystery books, she was allowed 15 fucks. She's like, not literally, I'm not just choose wisely.
I have to say, I've been, you know, the very first book there was a little bit of talk of censorship, but the very first book I had no idea kind of the audience, and I had, you know, things which I can see now why they went, oh, you know, can't have that. Now, maybe I do write with a little bit of it in my mind, but I haven't, you know, when I put the last book through, I was waiting and expecting a bit of, this about language, this about sex, and there was nothing, and that was the states as well. So, but I think now, a bit with contemporary kind of realism, especially if it's kind of pitched a bit older, I think that's maybe what they even want. I can understand why yours when it's that little bit lower. It's like, was it young adult? Someone else gave me that category, young adult. And I can kind of understand it, because then if you've got kind of like 9-year-olds and 10-year-olds, it is hard.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it goes quite as low as that, but I've certainly had a lot of readers who have been 11 or 12, and I guess I can.
But I'm sad that they didn't let her have her roundhouse kick, and I actually think that's...
Yes, that's totally wrong.
She's allowed to martial arts.
Absolutely.
I thought so, and it was, you know, it was an instinctive reaction rather than a measured thing. It was just shock. So, but, you know.
In my first novel, which was actually written for grown-ups, it was a lesbian private eye novel, and unconsciously, because there was so much lesbian fiction at the time, there was so much angst of them coming out and all that sort of stuff, so I was not writing that. All my lesbians were perfectly comfortable with being lesbians. But I didn't use the word lesbian. None of my lesbians used the word lesbian. It got used once by some other person who looked across the room and inaccurately said, oh, she must be a lesbian. To my lesbian character, who's thinking to herself, you know, what you know. And I also only used the word fuck once in that first book. And it was because it was entirely appropriate, because my character Kit was waiting for someone in a newspaper office, and this woman whirls in like a whirling dervish full of plastic bags and all sorts of stuff and red hair going everywhere, and she's was complaining about the fucking photographer who had just made her take a pointing picture, pointing at the, getting a council at a point in the building. And it was entirely appropriate because I don't know whether she knows this, but that character was entirely based on Carmel Shoot. and I just knew that that's how Carmel would flow into a room, and I had to use it for her. She was the only one involved who used it.
You have to be prepared to write, like Simone said, there has to be an element of realism. Kids aren't going to buy it. They're not dumb. They're extremely well educated readers, and now they've kind of grown up on well, I should say a diet of TV and films and books designed towards their interests or aimed towards their interests. But to some extent, their understandings of the world are much broader than we give them credit for. And they're aware themselves that they're kind of they're flawed, and that's the process of in a way each YA book, whether it's in the coming of age genre or in crime or in whatever, they're all coming of age books to a certain extent, because it's about finding out who they really are as people.
Well, a lot of people here know who Mandy Randles is. She's a member of Sisters in Crime, and she won the Scarlet Stiletto Award the first time she ever wrote a short story and submitted it. And she also has 3 boys. Now, her eldest boy's just turned 13, I think. But from when he was 11 and 12, he was reading almost one of those Rick Jordan, Percy Jackson ones. He went from Percy Jackson to something else, and then all of a sudden, over an entire just Christmas holidays, he read Lord of the Rings. Now, I haven't even read Lord of the Rings, but he read it, and he not only read it as a 12-year-old, but he understood it, so he was annoying the hell out of Mandy by analysing, going and talking to her about it, and this has happened and that's happened and everything. And so she just threw her hands up in the air when he wanted to watch Breaking Bad on television. So they watched Breaking Bad together, and they watched the Walking Dead together, and they're adult shows. And his brain is here. His brain is big enough. He can cope with it. He understands that it's fiction, and I think that's where we should be aiming the young adult stuff. Create the realistic characters for the children and young adults out there that you know. And make it as real for them as possible, and that requires the occasional swear word or a bit more than a snog, obviously.
I think though that there's a spectrum, no, maybe not a spectrum, but people are all different. And so one of the problems, and this is a personal bugbear of mine, because when Dangerously Placed came out, I had a US blog tour, and one of the people said that they liked the book, but it was, it didn't speak to them because it didn't have memes. And so basically what they were talking about is current pop culture references. And I actually deliberately don't put current pop culture references in my books for a number of reasons. One is that it takes me a long time, or has historically, until my son was at school recently, taken me a really long time to write a book. And then once you are accepted, it's easily a year usually, unless you're really getting fast-tracked before your book comes out, and so on and so forth. And people aren't going to pick it all up on the first day. The point is that if you start putting in, what the latest thing is, it's something that dates incredibly quickly, and I don't think it's necessary. And I think it makes people think that teenagers are this big homogenous mass of, texting, Justin Bieber loving, this kind of thing. Once you get that idea that all teenagers swear, that all teenagers are interested in drugs, that all teenagers have sex, some of them do. That's fine by me. But some of them don't, and I guess writing also from my personal experience as a dorky teenager who had acne and glasses and a flat chest and didn't get any action, just makes you think, well, there's got to be books about those kind of people as well. And so sometimes, I get a bit annoyed at people saying, your stuff's probably pitched lower because you don't have full-on sex scenes or drugs or, kids swearing every second word, because teenagers aren't all like that. And I think that there's a lot of places where diversity needs to be stronger in young adult anyway, such as sexuality and, you know, things like this anyway. And particularly, I'm always very conscious of trying to have ethnicity as a wide thing, because my friends are from a variety of different ethnic backgrounds, and I am very conscious to do that in my books as well. But I think that, yeah, sometimes people get this whole thing of, oh, it's not realistic if they're not talking about the latest craze, or they're not all out there, you know, texting each other like mad, or swearing, or that kind of thing. So there's maybe an argument for not having that in some books as well.
Of course there is. That's what I mean. You make it realistic to the context of your own novel, the type of characters that you've got. I mean, like Ellie starts off, Rachel Watts is a country girl, and she's still coming to terms with even living in the city, so she's got this whole sensibility of open space and sort of, you know, a farm. Where she was on her own most of the time, and doing things like that, and there was none of that sort of, and then all of a sudden she's thrust into, where is it, Footscray? Coburg. Oh, yes. So she's in Coburg, and, you know, you couldn't get more inner city Melbourne than that, and with all the things that go with it. And with your character, Simone, it's, you know, she's a complete inner city girl, but she's still kind of a little bit innocent for most of it, and that's the whole coming of age thing. It's what happens.
Yeah, it's just whoever your character is, it's got to be
true to that.
True to them.
I think are we getting close to time now? No, Question, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Questions? Yes.
Hi, I'm interested in the journey between having written your book and getting into a publisher. I've just written a book myself in YA and got shortlisted for TEDx Prize this year.
That's fantastic.
Fantastic, but I didn't win. And so now where am I?
Oh, so you might be sending it to an agent?
Yep.
Because you've got this accolade kind of under it. So
Pitch it around to publishers now while it's still hot, and then pitch. It's still hot, isn't it? And pitch it to agents at the same time, and then once you get a nibble from a publisher, then contact all your agents again and say, hey, I've just had a nibble. Would you like to come on board?
So with this whole agent thing, I gather that agents are a bit like untouchables, that they're very hard to approach.
no, I just think that they actually want. I think there's so much stuff. And it's the same with publishers. There's so much stuff that comes in that when something really good comes in, or if something comes in and has got like someone saying it's good that they trust, or you know, they can read the first page, something like that, then it's going to already kind of at least get to the pile where somebody reads it. That's my feeling. Yeah. So I just would say put it out there.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Oh, yes. Oh, very interesting. I'm interested in what books writers of YA, what books you read yourself. And while I was listening earlier, I thought, when I was a teenager, the books that we wanted to, books like Lord of the Flies, was, you know, initially.
Yeah, that would be published as YA if it was published today.
Sorry?
I would say Lord of the Flies, Catcher in the Rye, those sorts of books would have been published and marketed as YA books if they were published today.
Yeah, today they would, yeah. And then back then they were, you know, banned.
Yeah.
As that often comes.
Well, what I'm trying to say is those books, you know, we had to read for school. And I was thinking, well, what books did we seek out? So the books we sought out were like Port Noise Complaint, Mary McCarthy, The Group, Edna O'Brien, Doris Lessing, and, you know, not necessarily crime fiction, but that's what we were reading. So I'm interested to know what you people, you know, would read, because...
So we get sex in the YA now, we don't need to have Point Noise Complaint.
But do you mean reading now or reading when we were
Well,
teenagers?
yes, what sort of books, you know, do you read? I mean, I know we all have to read each other's...
I read all over the place. I do read a lot of young adult fiction, and I read kind of a lot of crime stuff, and I still read the stuff that I was attracted to when I was kind of 15 and 16, which is always, you know, it's just those books that you mentioned, I read those, and I can remember reading The Group and being totally like enthralled by it. Yeah, so I read all sorts of things, but I don't read a huge amount, I have to say. I don't read a lot of fantasy. I don't read a lot of kind of politically kind of, social realism, yeah, I do, so I suppose that's political, isn't it? And I read a lot of music biographies. I don't know.
Yeah, broad as broad as possible, but within the confines of YA, I try and, just trying to keep up with what's coming out in YA at the moment is pretty much a full-time job. I've always got about 3 books on the go at the same time, and I have a lot of trouble trying to diversify because I'm always trying to see what other people. I mean, some of the stuff that's coming out is amazing. I'm reading a book by Felicity Castaigne, who it's The Incredible Here and Now. Contemporary realist Australian YA at the moment is really at the forefront, I think, and it's amazing. So, yeah, that's what I'm reading. I'm kind of, same as Simone, I'm still reading the books that I was reading back in high school, except contemporary ones.
I think I've given up on trying to keep up. I just don't really have that much idea anymore of what's coming out. When I have friends who have got a book out, I try and read that. But I actually do read quite a lot of fantasy and things. I'm still reading, some of the ones, or rereading, that I'd never read earlier of Diana Wynne Jones's, and I'm always happy to go back to Terry Pratchett and that kind of thing. And I actually read a lot of manga, which people look down on, but shoujo manga, Japanese girls comics, is a huge influence on my work. So it's probably not something that most writers read, but that's what I think.
You'd be surprised.
Just a quote and then a question. I think it's great that you do this, you're talking about making your writing diversified in respect to that not all teenagers are the same. And also I think it's really important to remember that when teenagers are out of the house with their other friends, they might be like that, but quite often a lot of them aren't like that when they come back in that house. That's where they don't have to be in the clique, they don't have to do that. So I think it's really important that they can read novels and stories about people who aren't like that.
With a diverse range of characters.
Yeah. And my question is, and you may have answered a little bit by talking about what you read, but how do you know that you're getting into the head of teenagers? How as adults can you feel that this is what a teenager would think or feel now? And you remember, do you do it from your feeling and memories of when you were a teenager?
I don't think these 3 have grown up yet.
Yeah, I have moments where I will be at a station or something, and we'll see a bunch of teenagers and think, different world, totally different. I think I'm just writing what I would have liked to have read when I was 15 a lot of the time, and it is, and I do feel like I've got a kind of fairly young headset in some ways. Yeah. So yeah, look, I don't try and don't go and interview them. I mean, I used to do quite a few school visits. I do less and less of those, and when I do them, they're always really interesting. But it can be kind of alienating, and I think this is the thing that I don't want to write for them. I do actually want to write for me, like I do. So whether they end up liking it, sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're forced to read it.
We've got someone trying to play that plane at the back. Oh, it's Jackie.
Jackie Tracy's article that was written in America recently about adults should be embarrassed to read.
Everyone loves that one.
What motivates another adult to tell other adults what to read?
She's just
Jealousy.
So annoying. Do you know, you talked about that before, Nancy. 55% of young adult books are bought by people over the age of 25 to be read by themselves, not for gifts for younger friends.
I'm assuming that she just doesn't get it. She doesn't enjoy them, and so she's like, why would you bother? There's the same reason you probably tell anyone not to do something,
Yeah.
Don't wear those pants, you look ridiculous.
It's like it's like the people who don't read fantasy, they say fantasy is rubbish.
Yeah.
And the rest of us writers, whether we write it or not, just have to point out it's not rubbish. You just don't like it. Or you don't.
And it's like everything else. Young adult, much like any other genre, there's good stuff in it, there's crap stuff in it.
yeah.
And if you've just only read the awful things,
But also, as soon as a book becomes like as huge as, say, The Fault in Our Stars, which is huge, it's amazing. You go into a school and you ask kids what they've read, and if you say, have you read The Fault in Our Stars, all the hands will go up. So as soon as something like that happens, people just kind of, I don't know, go, this is what that is, instead of investigating.
some of us don't actually want to write about, depressing, dying people.
Yeah. And on that note, I think it's time to go.